Here's another piece of advice for authors. You have to write from your authentic experience and write what resonates or calls to you. I think it's a lot harder and sometimes gets exposed when an author is stepping outside and trying to do something because they think that's what people want. I think you have to write from your authentic self, and people will feel that and see that in what you write, and that will help you succeed.
Hi everyone, welcome back to Living the Next Chapter. I have an author on the show that doesn't have just one book. This author has many books, and I love the fact that we can fall in love with a new author and learn about them, hear the story behind the story. And Damian's here on the show. I'm so excited to have Damian on the podcast. Damian, welcome to Living the Next Chapter. Glad to have you here.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited. It's fun to be here.
Excellent. Tell everybody where you are in this great big world of ours.
Yeah, well, Paul and I live in a suburb of Chicago, Downers Grove. We've been here for about 5 years, in Chicago area for about 20 years.
Awesome. The Windy City. Awesome.
Yeah, the Windy City, which lives up to its reputation both in terms of the weather and in the blowhard politics. Which is where I really got the name.
There you go. You got that down pat. I like that. Yeah. That's good. Damian, I love starting here in our conversation. We have authors listening to the show, and they're on a journey themselves to write their first book, maybe, and they've come for some wisdom and knowledge from an author that's done a lot of this in your past. I would love to kind of touch on maybe some of your background and what you've learned over the process of writing, but how did all this start for you? How did you become an author?
I went to graduate school to study history, which I did. And for 20 years, I was a history professor before I retired from that. And that, of course, deals with nonfiction. I've written nonfiction. That's under my other name, David Secchi, which is my actual name. Damian Serbu is my pen name. And while I was studying all this nonfiction, there's nothing wrong with nonfiction, by the way. When I have my Damian hat on, sometimes I sound like I'm dissing it, which is because during graduate school, and it was so intense, sometimes I needed a release, just something fun, cathartic, and creative to do. So I started writing fiction. And when I started that journey, I had no vision that it would become something I would ever publish, or even really, I didn't even really sense I would ever share it with somebody. But the more I did it and the more the stories came to fruition, the more I got a little bit of a bug to see, well, maybe I could publish a short story, which I finally did. Maybe I could craft this into a novel. And so that was my journey. It was a hobby. I don't have any formal training in creative writing. And so that was a fun process, but also time-consuming and labor-intensive, and in terms of why I write speculative fiction, why I'm into vampires and stuff. That's been a hobby of mine, something that's been fun to do as far as back as I can remember. My journey into horror came in the 80s when Cablevision was new, so I loved horror movies that we couldn't otherwise see, and I was just in love with the genre. I was scared to death sometimes. It scared the crap out of me. And I'm like, oh, this is fun. So that's why when I started writing fiction, I drifted toward vampires and witches and ghosts and things.
We have a lot of authors that are listening, and maybe they're on their journey of writing their first book. Anything kind of come to mind? What would you address a room full of new authors as a teacher? Put your teacher hat on for a second.
Well, my teacher.
You're going to teach it. You're going to teach a class about writing. Did you have any beginning stage stuff?
One thing is you need to find a balance between listening to advice and just writing and doing your thing, because you can become inundated with, well, this author said to do this, and then this author said to do this. I've sat on panels where we've talked about this before, and one author will say X, and then the other author will say, oh, that's a bad idea, never do that. So I don't think in either of those cases that either author is wrong. They're speaking from their experience. So it's important to listen to people, to hear advice, but then adapt it and kind of form it into your personal relationship with your writing. maybe your writing style, your learning style, your creative process, because not everything is going to work that you hear. And I preface with that because some authors don't like when I say this. I think it is crucial to get your writing in front of somebody else. If it's new and you haven't experienced that before, I'm not talking about sending it out maybe to a press yet, or a journal, or an agent, or whatever path you're looking for. But find somebody, maybe it's a friend, maybe it's a former mentor, somebody that will look at your stuff and give you honest feedback, because that's crucial for the learning process. To have somebody look at your stuff and then react to it. So just side note from my career of doing this, I had been writing for a number of years, as I mentioned, just for myself. And I finally gave it to some people to look over to see what they thought. And my brother read my first draft of a book, and he came back and he said, he loved the story and the idea, but he said, nobody talks this way in your dialogue. And what I learned from that was, go back to academically trained history, which is a very formal way of writing. You're quoting things, it's kind of high arch. And that was leaking into, because that's the writing I had been doing, I was leaking into how I was writing my novel. And it was okay if it was like a paragraph description of something, but in my dialogue, I needed to learn to write my dialogue more effectively. For me, after I received his feedback, what I started doing, I still do this to this day, is when it comes time to editing my dialogue, I do it out loud. And that gives me a sense for how somebody would hear it if they were speaking it. And I catch myself, it's little things, but they make a big difference, like a contraction. Like if you're going to say something, I never can think of an example when I'm on the hot seat, but it's like if you want to say, I can't go to the supermarket. If you were talking to somebody, you'd say, I can't go today. But if you're just kind of writing it out, what I would do is it would be like, I cannot go today, like everybody's super formal. So what I learned from that, and I kind of knew this would just be maybe ingrained to the fact that I'm a teacher, is that feedback is crucial. So give it to somebody trusted who will give you honest feedback. Now, don't necessarily give it to somebody that's going to tear you down, because the other thing that can happen is if you start to get feedback, or every author goes through this rejection when you submit stuff, you have to kind of brace yourself for that, because that can be deflating. You can get kind of like, oh, I'm a failure, I can't ever do this. So in seeking feedback, you want somebody who will be constructive and helpful, but not tear you down. Somebody that'll also say, hey, like, you could work on this dialogue, but this story is really working for me. And because, I'll talk about my teacher hat, I always tell students, once you start writing, unless it's a diary or a personal note or something you never intend for anybody else to see, you're actually writing for other people. And so and with fiction, I find in particular, it's so deeply personal. You can pour your soul and your emotion into it. And the thought of having to edit it, or somebody saying, hey, this isn't quite resonating with me, can feel like they're stabbing you in the heart. They're not. They're helping you. And so learning how readers look at your stuff and editing and working on it with an eye toward that readership is really important.
Well, so take me back again to your history background. What was it about history that caught your attention that you wanted to teach that? Like, why is that so important to you?
I can't remember a time when I didn't absolutely love history. When I was about 7 or 8, maybe 6 even, we went on a trip to Boston, Massachusetts. When I was 10, we went to Washington, D.C. My dad was a big history buff, so I think that he certainly inspired some of it. I don't know if he induced it in me or if it was there and then he just pulled it out and nurtured it. But he and I could go on trips and just visit historic places, and I had always loved it. So then once I started in school, even as as early as like junior high and high school, I knew I wanted to teach. I gravitated toward history, social studies, because that's what I love. Also, I love looking at the past. I love trying to understand why we are who we are in this world today, and really study history with an eye toward then improving our own selves and our own future through that knowledge.
How does your love for history impact your writing?
I am, well, sometimes it can cripple me in the early research stages. So like in Witch in the Wind, which just came out, it's set during the Salem witch trials, which I had studied quite a bit of. And I knew that history, but the main character, Alexander, flees Salem on a pirate ship. And I kind of knew about pirates, but not a lot. So I was like, oh, I need to learn about pirates. This is where being a historian can be like a curse for an author. Because suddenly it was like I was in graduate school and I was supposed to write a 30-page paper on the history of pirates or something. And I was reading all this stuff about pirates. It was fascinating. I absolutely loved it. But it was also, there were times I was like, hey, you got to stop. You can't read 5 more books on pirates. My writing is when I set something at a historic time, or even if it's contemporary, but it's around an event that actually happened. I'm very careful with the history. I want, like my mom said, unlike my dad, my mom is not a history buff. And so when she read my first vampire novel, which is set during the French Revolution, she accused me of being sneaky and making her learn the history of the French Revolution because she was reading my novel. So it definitely affects my writing, because if I put somebody like Thomas and Xavier and the Vampire's Angel during the French Revolution, that history, I want to be accurate. With Witch in the Wind, I wanted the pirate history to be as accurate as possible, or the history of Salem. So my loves and passions kind of merge in that regard.
So when did Witch in the Wind come out?
It was released this June. Okay, 2020.
Good. Any early feedback on Witch in the Wind? Yeah,
it's been positive. It's hard to get reviews. I don't have a lot of those yet, but readers have been really kind. The couple of reviews that are out there are really kind. So yeah, it's been really, it's been a fun journey. This isn't my first time around at the rodeo, but a little bit of background. It was about 5 years ago that I retired from teaching and just dedicated myself full-time to writing. So this is the first time I've had a novel where I really had the time to do more of a broad publicity tour with it. Forth in the past, so it's been pretty exciting. There's something gratifying about putting a story out there and then having people tell you that they enjoyed it. I'm always very, very humbled by that, and so yeah, it's been fun to hear from people and know that they've enjoyed what I wrote.
So I have your Amazon page up while we're chatting. There's a lot to choose from your library of books. How many books do you have out there in the world currently?
I think there are 8 novels in print right now.
Wow. Okay, so are you still in love with all 8?
I am. Because I have been asked before at readings or at venues, and it's like, that's like asking a parent who their favorite kid is. Even if they have an answer, they're not going to do it publicly because it could destroy somebody. Yeah, they all have their own special journey. It's really fascinating to me how much of my own life experience and current circumstances influence what I write. So this is kind of a fun story, if you bear with me. The Vampire's War is the novel that came out in 2023 before Witch in the Wind. It's the 5th in my vampire series. And that's when I was going through my transition from teaching to writing full-time. And the book was published. It was out there. And I had a really good friend ask me, do you think what you've experienced over these last few months influenced this novel? And I had never considered that. In the novel, the main character is one of my repeat vampires. And he's going through a traumatic experience. He's feeling like he's not being heard. He's frustrated. And so I was writing all of this as I was going through these experiences. I had never stopped to think, well, how is that shaping this story? Because the story started before any of this all happened. It felt independent to me, but when she said that, it was like, it really resonated that, oh my gosh, like all of these experiences, like I was pouring it into this novel. It's not like I was doing autobiography, but there was emotion and experience that was merging there. And I think that's probably true of all of my novels. Santa is a Vampire is a dark satire. Unlike most of my stuff, I would not say it is satirical. And it's not particularly dark. Like my horror is more Anne Rice-ish horror as opposed to Stephen King horror.
Okay,
But in Santa is a Vampire, I go closer to like that kind of horror with what main character experiences, who's an elf enslaved by Santa. And that blend of like horror and humor, that is so me, because I like to laugh and do things. So, yeah, I think all of them have a little piece of me to them, and that's fun. But I also think, and this is cool too, which is, we were talking about reader feedback a little bit ago. It's always fun to hear from readers because I view writing and publishing it much like a piece of art, a painting or a print, that the artist has a vision, is inspired by something, is telling a story through their artwork. But then when it's hanging on a wall or it's a sculpture and people are walking around it, different people will see it in different ways and get different experiences from it. And I find that with my novels as well, which is why I like to have all of them out there, because, I've had somebody read one and they're like, hey, I like this, but whatever. And then they'll read another one. They'll be like, oh my gosh, this really called to me, what it was teaching or what it was saying.
Yeah. And looking at your author blurb on Amazon as well, you actually mention, the LGBTQIA plus community as well in your author blurb. Is that like a big theme throughout all of your books as well? Is that part of the story?
Yeah, it's a huge part of it.
Okay, explain that. Yeah.
So, as a gay man, when I was, growing up, and particularly after I came out, there was this dearth of horror written for the LGBTQ community. When something came out, I had to gobble it up because it was so rare. And one of many things, but one of the reasons that I discovered Anne Rice, by the way, I had a great friend, Kelly Lardy, recommend that I read her stuff. This was like in the early 90s, probably. So she had been around for quite a while, but I had never read her stuff. And Kelly kept saying, with your love of vampires and, being gay, you got to read Anne Rice. You got to read Anne Rice. And one of the things that called me to Anne Rice was that she messed around with sexuality and attraction. Her characters weren't necessarily explicitly gay, but they definitely gave a vibe. And so that was so that spoke to me in such a powerful way. It's one of the reasons she's always been my favorite author. Not the only reason, but one of the reasons. So then when I started writing, that was important to me to continue that sense of, as a member of the LGBTQ community, I wanted my books to always resonate with that. So there are always LGBTQ characters. That's always part of their story, because once you come out, it is part of your life all the time.
Yeah. Are you seeing a growing number of authors now in the community writing, and it's not as rare as it was back in
No, it's not. It's exploded now. Yeah.
Nice.
Now, there was a time when I was like, if there was anything gay, horror, speculative fiction, I read it. And I was really dedicated to hunting it down and finding it. And now there's so much, it's like, yeah, that's not going to happen, which is good. There's more representation out there. And people can start to find not just, hey, I'm into speculative fiction or horror, but they can say, hey, I really like gay vampires, and that's what I'm looking for. I like something different. So yeah, it's exploded. It's pretty exciting to me.
Okay, let's talk again to the authors that are listening that are in the community, and they're thinking, am I going to be accepted as an author to put these things out there? This is what I want to write about. Is there an appetite for that? Is there people looking for my work if I do that kind of writing? What's your encouragement to them to get out there and share their stories?
Yeah, the the kind of trite answer is there's so many people looking for those stories now. People like to feel like that they're reflected in it. There are trans stories that are just amazing. There are stories with asexual characters that are amazing. So people can find themselves in these books, which I think is so important, especially for young people finding their way, or maybe they're just starting their journey with their sexuality. To find somebody who's writing to them, like for young adult literature is just burgeoning with this stuff. So the important thing is to know you're not alone. There are people out there, and as we've gained acceptance and the world has changed, now there's a lot of change that still needs to happen, but as that has happened, more and more stories are even more mainstream, that it's not like, well, I'm writing from a gay male perspective, so those are the only people who are going to want to read my story. That's not true anymore. I think at one point it was more like isolated like that. But now it's like, here's another piece of advice for authors. You have to write from your authentic experience and write what resonates or calls to you. I think it's a lot harder and sometimes gets exposed when an author is stepping outside and trying to do something because they think that's what people want. Right. I think you have to write from your authentic self, and people will feel that and see that in what you write, and that will help you succeed.
So your original platform was a teacher in front of students in the classroom. Your platform now is an author writing and sharing stories. Is there any similarities between those two platforms, being a teacher and being a writer, or any differences?
Yeah, it's not nearly as scary to put a novel out there as it is to sit in front of a room full of college students.
Right.
I think the similarity is that you're sharing something with people. Even in the classroom, I'm trying to share history with the students, to teach them about it, to expose them to it. Quite often, by the time I teach students, they have been traumatized by history, not their own personal history, so that can happen, but I mean by the way it's taught, by how much there's this emphasis on, hey, memorize these dates, these people, and then barf it back onto a page. So I'm trying to calm things down and not emphasize memorization as much as learning from the history and understanding the story and why it's important. And I think that's true in writing fiction as well. There's a story I'm telling. I don't know that I always have a specific lesson I want people to pull away from it, but I hope that they gain something from it, whether it's escapism for a little while or they relate to a character because of something that they've experienced. It's that, hoping that they're learning something just like my students learn something, and that it's shaping them, even if it's just for a little while.
I think the best teachers and the best learning environment that I've ever been in is when the teacher connects with the students in a unique way and doesn't just get up there and teach as if there's no students there and talks to empty chairs, but actually connects with you.
Yeah.
And that connection, I think, makes me a better learner. I get more out of the class when I have that bond with my teacher. How do you make a connection with your readers as an author now? How do you actually build that bond?
Yeah, so that's one of my personality traits is I'm super shy. So sometimes putting myself out there or putting myself in front of people can be a little intimidating. I get much more. It's funny because sending something to a publisher is not nearly as nerve-wracking as standing in front of a group of people. Sometimes it's worse if it's friends and everything, because it's like, they know me, I'm going to be exposed in all of this. But so I've learned to share, to be out there, to engage with the audience. And what I found, that people are pretty kind and they resonate with what you're writing. And it's fun then to hear from people and know that maybe somehow you've touched their lives. A year ago, I went to a library event that's in a rural part of America that for Americans, it would be like bright red, kind of conservative. And through this event, one of the people that I met who was organizing it had a gay son growing up in that environment. And then I returned this year and I actually got to meet him. He's in high school now. My story, which I didn't know this would happen, and I don't I'm really uncomfortable tooting my own horn like this, but because I was there and because I have a young adult novel and his mom had him read it, it spoke to him in a world where he kind of felt isolated and alone. So it was so much fun this year to meet him, to interact with him and see how he's kind of started to dabble in his own writing and know that in some small way, my putting a novel out there touched somebody. Those are the stories that they can be so powerful to me because I don't imagine myself doing that. And yet I think a lot of authors have that experience.
What I loved when I talked to you, Damian, I feel like you as an author are rewriting history. With your words and as you write your novels and your stories, you're actually rewriting the history. Again, go back to your early days when you had to hunt and search to find authors that reflected you and where you were at and how hard that was. And now it's a little bit more accepted and it's more out there and it's easier to find for your community. And I love that about this. And you're creating something for people like that student who can read something that is a mirror for themselves and they see themselves in there. I love that. I think that's amazing.
Well, thank you. Yeah. It's sometimes, as a historian, I prefer to look at things 15 to 20 years in the past and putting myself in that history, like I said, can be a little uncomfortable, but it is fun to think that I'm trying to have that effect and that it has helped. If it's helped anybody, that means a lot to me.
So, okay, Witch in the Wind. Tell me some of your key characters in this that we're going to come across. Introduce us to them and kind of unpack a little bit about the general idea of the story for us as a new reader.
Sure. So it starts with Alexander. Alexander is the main character. You're experiencing the world from his point of view. He has a traumatic event at the very beginning set in Salem, and he has to flee. Before he flees, there has been a young nobleman in the area who has befriended him, and they've started a relationship, but that has to end. And he always kind of longs for that and is seeking his place in the world. At the same time as all of this is transpiring, he has discovered that he has the power of witchcraft. He can control the wind, he can heal people, and he can see through a crystal ball distant events happening as they take place. So that's Alexander's story, is how is he going to survive? This is a little bit of a spoiler, but it happens in the first chapter, so if you're going to read it, no sweat. He loses his mom at the very beginning because she's accused of witchcraft. And her last dying instruction to him is you have to survive. You have to live and thrive. So even at low points, even when he's unsure of himself, he's looking to survive. And so he ends up on a pirate ship, gets in a relationship with the captain of the pirate ship. He forms friends with the pirates. So there's a couple main characters who are the pirates. One of my favorite characters, and this is not uncommon in the things that I write, dogs have always been super important to me and pets. So in some of my stories, I like to have a pet that's a main character. So there is a pet on the pirate ship, a parrot named King James. So that's one of my favorite characters. He's not a main character, but when he shows up, he's important. And he's serving a crucial role for one of the pirates in particular that you learn about during the journeys. So that's one of my, speaking of a pet, my pet favorite character in all of this is the parrot and his role in it.
Okay, so Alexander walks into your office. You get 5-10 minutes with this character that you've created, and you get to ask him anything that you want to ask him. There's something about him that you don't really fully understand or comprehend about him as a character. You have questions. What's a question you would ask Alexander if you could sit down and talk to that character?
I'd love to understand Alexander's confidence. He has a quiet, assured confidence about himself. When he makes a decision or sets out. Pirates are fascinating, but I'm giving you an example here with Alexander. Pirates are fascinating. They're also dangerous. So he's meandering around in the wilderness because he's had to escape. And he comes across the pirate that takes him to the other pirates. From the beginning of that interaction, even as he sees the pirate, is seriously considering whether or not he should just kill Alexander because it's dangerous or interact with him. Alexander the whole time is just assured, I'm going to make this work. I don't have any other choice. So he has this incredible self-confidence, and I'd like to know more about that, where that came from and why that was an attribute that just kept coming out of his story.
Is there any part of your characters in your novels that is Damian at all?
Yeah, sometimes, definitely. Yeah. Different pieces, parts of me, different pieces, parts of other people. I never want to exactly replicate myself or somebody else, but there are certain aspects to the people, yeah. I can tell you, for example, Alexander has a loyalty to people, and a longing to be with them long term, whether they're friends or lovers or whatever. That's definitely part. But yeah, there are little pieces of me all over the place. But speaking of what we were just talking about with Alexander, that confidence is not. I've had to learn that and develop that. So I think that's why I wanted to ask him about it. Like, well, where'd this come from?
So we buy Witch in the Wind. It's our first purchase from your library. Where do we go next? What's the next book that we should go and look for from all of the amazing books you have out there?
Yeah, well, if you want to get involved in the vampire series, the first book in the vampire series is The Vampire's Angel. You can always go to my website. On my website and my books pages, I have them listed in order for this series. Now, I know authors say this all the time, so it's easy to hear this, but I very much write, even within the series, so you can pick up a novel without having read the entire series. So, like, for example, book 4 in this series, which is The Vampire's Protege. If you're looking to read something with a villain as the main character, but you kind of resonate or connect with the villain, it's The Vampire's Protege. But it really is a story that stands on its own. And I like it, talking about things that I always like. When I was growing up, I was fascinated with the Wicked Witch of the West and Darth Vader, Hannibal Lecter, like these villains. Not just that they're villains and they can be awful, but there's something that's kind of charismatic about them. I'm like, why do we like these villains? That's what The Vampire's Protege is. So that's a fun one if you don't want to go back and read the whole series, although I'd love it if you want to. That's when you can just kind of pick up and get into. And then we're approaching the holidays. So Santa as a Vampire is always a fun Christmas read. You talk about being a historian and working that into my history. There's a lot of history about the legend of Santa Claus and how it came about to being the image of Santa that we have today that's in my novel.
Okay, what was the spark to write that one? Were you in like a Christmas mood?
I love the holidays. I go out with decorating. As a horror writer, associates us with Halloween, which I very much enjoy, and I decorated for Halloween too. But I really go crazy with the holidays, infamously. So I put up around 24 Christmas trees around the house. So it's completely out of control. So yeah, part of it was just merging my favorite holiday with my writing a little bit. And then I used to joke around all the time, there's something creepy about Santa. There's this guy that invades your home. He's a little, too attached to little kids and stuff. I'm like, what's really going on there? So then that was okay, we're going to write that story.
Right. I love it. Okay. Damian, you did mention you have a website where we can go as well. I'd love to put that in the notes for everyone to come follow up our conversation and come and meet you and connect with you through your website. I do have one last question I want to ask you before we close off, but tell us where we're going to go and how we can connect with you and follow your journey further.
Yeah, you said it right. The best place to go is DamianSerbu.com. I have links there to social media. I'm on Twitter or whatever it's called now. Instagram, Facebook, Threads, Blue Sky, but those links are all at my website, so I think it's a lot quicker just to go to the website. I also have a newsletter And there's a sign up form on my website. So I encourage people to sign up for my newsletter. One thing I'll say, I tell this to people when I'm like out and about and ask them to sign up. I swear I only send my newsletter out one time a month. I'm not going to inundate you with messages every other day. One time a month, I just send you out, hey, this is what's going on, updates and links and stuff like that. So that's the best place to connect with me, definitely.
So the name of my show is Living the Next Chapter. So my question is framed in context of the title of my podcast. I'm curious, Damian, how are you living your next chapter? What's coming up for you down the road? Really kind of curious to hear what's happening next for you.
Yeah, I have a few things in the hopper. Some of them I'm just shopping around. Some of them I'm, not even that far along with. But I have a sequel to Santa as a Vampire. I would love to get out there. It's called The Easter Bunny as a Werewolf. So we'll see if I can find a publisher for that. It's a weird genre mix with the satire and the horror, so that can be a challenge. I also just finished the first draft of a young adult novel, which is about an alien invasion. It doesn't even have a title yet, but I sent it to my beta readers. I was talking about send it to people and give feedback. I still do that. So I have some close friends. One is my high school English teacher, who's become a really dear friend of mine, and he's always one of my first readers and gives me great assistance. So I wrote, it's kind of speculative fiction, it's kind of horror-ish, but then for some reason I always end up with these like romance elements to my stories. So it's young adult. It'll be my second young adult novel if I get that one out there and published somewhere. I'm super excited about it. And then I'm a member of the Horror Writers Association. Right now I'm in the second tier. The Witch in the Wind is to sell enough copies of it so I can become a full active member of Horror Writers. So I'm spending a lot of time plugging and working toward that goal.
Good. Damian, I love having you on the show. I love how you unpack everything for us. I really feel like you've brought us behind the scenes and given us some insight into our next favorite book. And I love introducing new readers to authors. I think this is such a great way in a podcast setting for us to do this. And I love the idea that I'm going to hold your book in my hands and open it up before I read a single word from one of your books. What's your message to your readers, to your audience? Any words of thanks or to your community? What do you want to say to the people listening who love what you do?
I mentioned this earlier in our conversation. I'm just so humbled that somebody would buy my book, that somebody would read it, and that it's whether it's just a little bit of fun while they're on vacation, or they need to get away from real life for a little while, or it's just they're just enjoying it. I'm not just saying this because like you're supposed to. I really am just like awed that happens, and I appreciate it. Like I can't tell you how much I appreciate having readers, and anytime they want to shoot me a message, you can connect with me through my website. I'd love to hear from you.
Awesome. So everyone, the Vampire's Witch is there, the Vampire's Angel, Vampire's War, Witch in the Wind is the most recent one. Everyone needs to go buy a copy and leave an amazing review for Damian to encourage Damian to keep writing. We want more and more from this great author. But those words that you leave in your reviews, they do mean a lot to the people that are thinking about making a purchase. So my encouragement to everyone listening, when you buy, because you will, when you buy Damian's book, leave a great review so that everyone knows what you think of this as well. Damian, thank you so much for being part of the podcast. Thank you for stepping into this world and creating amazing works for people. I love what you do, and I'm so glad that you have time to be on the show.
Thanks for having me. I had a lot of fun. I mentioned this before, but this podcast, this forum is so relaxing. I hope the readers can feel that, because I've done other interviews and stuff, and it's not always just super chill. Sometimes it's like edgy, or you're like, oh, where is this going? But this feels like, I don't know, like we were in a bar just having beers and chatting, and I think it's fun. Like in preparation, I listened to the other authors you've interviewed, and it's pretty consistent that there's just this really relaxed, fun conversation. So I appreciate you having me on.
Excellent. And there was even a random parrot thrown in there as well. So that's great.
Right.
To King James, thank you for being part of this as well. Damian, thanks so much for doing this. It's great to have you here. Okay, well, Thank you for being here on Living the Next Chapter. I hope you enjoyed this episode. We enjoyed having you here on the podcast. Our authors are amazing. I hope you appreciate their time, their effort to make this possible. If you know an author, if you want to recommend an author, that's a good idea. Hey, if there's an author that you really would love to hear about or hear from, if you tell me, if you send me a message, you speak pipe on our website, livingthenextchapter.com, send me an email, go over to livingthenextchapter.com, send us a message. We will forward your message to that author and say, listen, you are being requested to be on Living the Next Chapter. Our audience can't wait to hear from you. You can help shape the show. Yeah, you. You could do that right now, actually. You got a minute, right? Okay, how about you do that? livingthenextchapter.com. I'll see you over there. Recommend an author. Yeah. See you. Thanks.